an Oriole defeat, a rare late inning Oriole defeat at the hands of the San Diego Padres on Tuesday night. Luke Jones joins his action. I got to. You better hope this is the Orioles in a game that it felt like they had in hand in the sixth inning, right?
I mean, you have to view it as an anomaly from a standpoint of this bullpen has been so good for could count the number on hand batter, and before you know it, a 6-3 lead in the seventh inning evaporated, and you're trailing 7-6. So really difficult. But one thing that I pointed out on Twitter, because a lot of people were beating up Buck Showalter and saying, did Buck fall asleep? Why is he leaving this guy in? Well, think back to the previous 4 starts that the Orioles had gotten. Mike Wright, 3 2/3 innings. Yovani Gallardo, 5 innings. Chris Tillman, 5 innings. Kevin Gausman, 5 innings. That adds up.
How about a trip on a plane on Sunday for a one-day road trip, too?
Sure,
right? I mean,
sure.
The day they were supposed to be off, they weren't off, right?
Right. So what I mean by that, and that's not to excuse how Michael Givens performed, but when your bullpen is handling that many innings, one turn through the rotation, you're not going to have everyone available. So think about it. Who were his alternatives? You didn't have Dylan Bundy. Brad Brock was unavailable because he pitched a lot over the weekend, which, they won 2 out of 3 from Toronto, so it's worth it. And you go down the list, Brian Dunsing, we found out before the game, dealing with an elbow issue, so he could end up on the disabled list here over the next day or two. And they had to recall Oliver Drake. Now Drake ended up replacing Michael Givens in that inning, and all things considered, considering he inherited
he was the best of the lot out of all of them, right?
Yeah, I mean he did an okay job.
Yeah.
But it was a case where you're in the 7th inning, so Zach Britton's not an option at that point. So you're looking at Adrisamar Despaigne or Ubaldo Jimenez. I mean, those are your other arms that are available to you. Bundy pitched on Monday night, so he was down after pitching 3 innings. So it was just when you're in a position where your starting pitching isn't going deep, when Tyler Wilson gives you 6 innings and that's considered a deep start for the Orioles standards, it just gives you such a small margin for error. And if you have one of your reliable bullpen arms off, as Michael Givens clearly was on Monday, it puts Buck Showalter in a near impossible position. So it was just really unfortunate from that standpoint. Zach Britton didn't pitch well in the 9th inning, although an error by Ryan Flaherty led to 2 of those 3 runs he gave up being unearned. But it was just a case where having poor starting pitching adds up. And even when they got a decent start, and when I say decent, it's not like Tyler Wilson was great on Tuesday night, but it was decent. But, you go 1 turn through the rotation and no one else even offers 6 innings, it is going to add up. So then when you go to a guy like Givens, who typically they will depend on to give them an inning or more, and most likely, though, you look at how that game was setting up on Tuesday night, probably where Buck was hoping Givens could give him more than 1 inning. Didn't work out, and it was just things fell apart very, very quickly. So again, and it's clear they're missing Darren O'Day. I don't know if I mentioned that, but that's stating the obvious. But if you don't have at least a couple of your starters 1 turn through the rotation, giving you some semblance of length, you're going to be in a position where you're only going to have 2 or 3 relievers available beyond just a mop-up guy, and that's the position the Orioles were in on Tuesday night.
Well, it's not going to be any better on Wednesday night. Luke Jones joining us here. You can follow Luke, Baltimore Luke, on Twitter, and always email him, Luke at WNST.net. We're going to be at the ballpark all week, and I was watching Messe a little bit on Tuesday night, but I did sneak over to Camden Yards, and so much to talk about here. There's a little bit of meat on the bone after this kind of a loss. Let's talk about defense, right? And that's something that during the Buck era, I think we've become very spoiled on the defense being just automatic. We just think everywhere the ball gets hit, someone's going to field it. As a matter of fact, a couple years ago, you look at 12 and in 14, you'd say, just let him hit it. We'll catch it. No problem. And I think Buck even said things like that. We let him hit it, we'll catch it. I don't know. This isn't one of those top 3 or, quite frankly, top 1 or 2 that we're accustomed to with the Oriole defense. This is a different team behind whomever is pitching right now. And as we saw with Flaherty, as we've seen at various points with, what have they made, 42, 43 errors so far this year? It is not automatic, and it does open the door. And when your pitching's a little suspect and your starters don't go long, tack that on to one more of the problems of the Orioles, who, by the way, are the first-place Orioles longer than they've been a first-place team. But if their defense was more like it had been in the past, we might be talking about a win today instead of a loss.
Well, a couple things here. I mean, clearly the Flaherty error hurt as far as the floodgates opening in the ninth, and what was a one-run deficit suddenly becomes a four-run game. Trumbo overran the ball in the seventh inning, which, you know what you're getting when you have Mark Trumbo playing right field.
Yeah, you gave him a glove, right?
I mean, I don't know what you expect, and this is why I said way back when I wasn't crazy about the Pedro Alvarez signing for that reason. Now, Pedro hit 2 home runs on Tuesday night. So
his glove looked great on Tuesday night. He was great in the field.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. He's great in the field as designated hitter.
Perfect.
But, I think overall the infield defense, even without Hardy over the last 7 weeks, has still been really good. And, Ryan Flaherty, I don't want to pick on him too much from a defensive standpoint because I think overall he has played good defense. I think where they've had the issues has clearly been in the outfield. And, you mentioned the high error total. Let's remember, the pitchers have been a big part of that. Now, that didn't really come into play on Tuesday night, but there have been a number of occasions. In fact, this pitching staff has as many errors itself as it did all of last year. When you have you have a lot of marginal fringe pitching talent, guys that aren't able to miss bats, guys that are going to depend on good defense, and they're not helping themselves, that's a problem. In fact, it was over the weekend, I think it was Saturday, that Buck had this pitching staff out on the field early going through some PFTs.
Going through the February Sarasota drills, by the way.
Yeah, and they do that a handful of times over the course of the season, but I don't think it was a coincidence that they did it on Saturday because we've seen that.
Buck hates bad defense. I mean, that's part of Buck's thing is, okay, maybe you missed the ball, but you better be able to catch it. I mean, you're in the big leagues, right? I mean, I can hear Buck saying that in the huddle, but more than that, you got Palmer in the booth, who's one of the greatest fielders of all time. I mean, he really takes umbrage to that because it's like, what are you doing the other 4 days when you're not pitching, right? I mean, this isn't all that hard to figure out.
Again, it's that, and look, if you're someone who strikes out batters and you have dominating stuff, someone like Clayton Kershaw, I'm just throwing that name out there. If you pitch like him, you can probably get away with not being a terrific fielder at your position. But these guys that the Orioles have, so many fringe, marginal type pitchers that are going to rely on good defense if they're going to be successful, and you're not going to be able to field your own position.
I'm always fascinated, by the way, of these pitchers, what they did in 12-13 ball, what they played Pony League, what position they played. Because, almost every kid, and maybe this isn't true with the Latin kids, and there aren't that many Latin pitchers, let's be honest, that all of these kids, Tyler Wilson was probably a third baseman or a shortstop, right? I mean, like, if I'm guessing, maybe Mike Wright, who's a little bit of a bigger guy, maybe he played the outfield or first base, probably didn't play second base or whatever, but most of these guys who pitch that are American, they played a key infield position for the most part. You would agree with that?
I mean, at some point, yeah, but at the same time, I played middle infield in high school. That doesn't mean I'd be able to field at a major league
Understood.
level. Right.
Sure.
No, your point's well taken, and it's something that needs to improve. And again, it didn't really pertain to the defensive hiccups they had Tuesday night. And I think overall, again, this infield defense I think is very good. And clearly with Machado coming back off the suspension on Friday, they'll finally have their starting infield back in place, and you feel really good about that. But
it's been 2 months, right? I mean, when you think about it, right?
So from a standpoint, overall, look, he's not Machado at third base. I'm not saying he is. It is a little more of a concern because you have Trumbo and Wright. I think Hyun-Soo Kim has played. He catches every 2014, and if you remember, I really banged the drum about this last year. Despite their air total being low and right up there, right at the top in the American League, a lot of their metrics weren't nearly as good last year as they were the year before that. So I mean, it doesn't do anything to help out your pitching staff. That's for sure. at some of those spots that I mentioned, and for the pitchers themselves, need to field their position much better because that can be the difference. I mean, we saw this with Kevin Gausman in that start at Fenway. He allowed the Red Sox to open it up and knock him out of the game instead of potential. So, it's important, whether it's an error or whether it's just a play that's not made. Those types of things add up. And, again, we saw this 2 years ago. When you play great defense, you can really make a mediocre pitching staff look very good, but worse than that. So, I'll be interested to see. I would definitely say the
winnable
bad message all the it tells the Joe Gunkels and the Nick Addingtons and the Odrisamer Despaigne, who pitched late in relief of Zach Britton, but you could have thrown Ubaldo out there in that situation, down 4 in the ninth, knowing that it's probably over at that point. But it says all those guys, we don't think you're even as good as someone with a 7 ERA. I think it sends a bad message to the rest of your club. And quite frankly, I think it sends a bad message to Ubaldo Jimenez, who was just replaced in the rotation a week ago. And we're saying, well, we didn't think you're good enough, but here's the ball because we don't think anyone else is good enough to go out there. I don't like it. I don't know if it's a case where perhaps they're viewing this finally as the Hail Mary, that they've said, okay, we've seen what's happened with our bullpen, happened to stash Ubaldo out there the last week. And there is a trickle-down effect here because they clearly don't have any confidence in him pitching in any high-leverage situation out of the bullpen. And even on Friday night, when in relief of Mike Wright, they were only down 4 runs at that point, and Ubaldo turned it into a laugher.
By the way, I must admit that, until being around baseball 20 years ago on a day-by-day basis, to see what a reliever does versus what a starter does, to take a starter and try to make him a reliever in the big leagues in the middle of the season, I don't know that that's ever a great idea. That if I were a manager, knowing what I know, I would either send the guy to Norfolk and have him start per contracts and all of that other stuff, the up and the down and guys' feelings and all that. But I don't think you're doing the team or the player any service at all by sending him to the bullpen and saying, when we get behind by 5 runs, we'll call you and you'll have to warm up in 5 minutes and come in here and probably make it worse. And that's exactly kind of how it went down. I've rarely seen guys that are career starters, not somebody that's fringy. And I know we talked about Gausman last year, and that's all. Hey, it's baseball and you got a glove. So guys like Ubaldo Jimenez, who, despite all the money and the success and the stuff and the fastball, clearly there's something between the left ear and the right ear of Ubaldo Jimenez that is not nearly as strong as the tendons in his arm.
Yeah, and there's validity to that. Now, I'll say this. I think if you are moving a guy to the bullpen because you're in a position where, heaven forbid, you have 5 good starters, and it's kind of silly to present this scenario because clearly it has nothing to do with what the Orioles are dealing with right now. But if you're sending a guy out there and he's going to pitch in meaningful spots, like we saw with Kevin Gausman 2 years ago in the postseason, he moved, because they had a 4-man rotation set. He was their 5th guy, and they said, all right, we're going to use this guy in some meaningful spots in the bullpen. And in a case like that where it's a guy who has a really live arm, I think it can work. But the scenario that you presented, and clearly is the case with Jimenez, is he's clearly not good enough to be in the starting rotation. They're committed $21 million to him through next year. I think you look at him from a confidence standpoint. Okay, he can pitch some low-leverage situations, and Buck has even alluded to this since when they were debating, and then they finally pulled the trigger on putting him in the pen. Just because he pitches in a couple situations like that, when do you really know that he's quote-unquote fixed, that you can try to put him back in the rotation? I don't think that's remotely the case here. Again, it speaks to not having any other options, although I really think it sends a bad message that you don't think anyone else is even worthy of trying. I mean, really? You think that you still think that no one else can even give a better than a 7 ERA? I mean, we're not talking about...
Well, especially if in the second inning tonight he's given up 7 hits and 4 runs. I mean, if that happens tonight, and you'd say, well, the fans will get down. I mean, it's relatively...
It'll get ugly.
Yeah,
it'll get ugly.
It's not a good concoction all the way around, and it feels like they're just throwing this one away after losing 2 in a row to get a day off to sort of exhale Friday to play division games, right?
Well, and they've said that they're going to make another move, at least according to what Showalter said after the game on Tuesday night. As far as a long man, whether they bring back Mike Wright and put Dunsing on the DL and have Wright be the long man, which would kind of be ironic. This would just be a flip situation from Friday night, quite frankly, against the Blue Jays.
And they're not going to bring Drake back into pitch tonight, so they're probably going to do something there, right?
Yeah. I mean, hypothetically they could option him, but like I said, Dunsing with the elbow issue, it sounds like he's going to be going to the DL based on what Buck had said. But I mean, it's just, and I'll go back to what I said. Maybe this is a Hail Mary last straw situation where they've said, we're going to throw Ubaldo out there, and if it's the same thing, maybe we will designate him for assignment. I mean, I'm not saying that will happen, but I almost feel they're getting to the point of...
Well, that involves the old man. Ain't no doubt about that.
No doubt.
I mean, that would involve the old man saying, I'm paying this guy $18 million and we're just going to release him. I don't know what you do when these things fail the way they fail, but I know sending him back out to the Hill tonight and paying customers, as well as folks like you that drive down from Shrewsbury, Luke, that this is Major League Baseball.
What it says to the rest of your club. I mean, put the fans aside for a second. It's just strictly the people that are directly impacted by this on a club that's in first place.
Yeah, I want to win.
It sends a bad message to them. So, I mean, it's I think it, unless it's that scenario that I presented, and again, I'm not saying it is, and they have eaten a good bit of money the last couple of years. I mean, last year we talked about this a lot, about eating money for Bud Norris and Delman. I mean, go down the list. It added up over time.
Well, it's one of the reasons Gonzales is pitching for the White Sox right now is they didn't want to eat a month or two, and maybe, I mean, Gonzales would make a nice start tonight for them, probably. It's certainly better than Jimenez,
That's just another footnote in they got rid of him, which, look, I said at the time he was throwing 87 miles per hour in the spring. I thought he was hurt. But the funny thing is, go look at his pitch FX data on Fangraphs. His velocity is right where it's been the last few years. I mean, that hasn't been, that's come back. Whatever the issue was for him, whether it was just a tired arm in the spring or what, that's come back. But the idea that you cut him loose, and yeah, it was $5 million, but we've talked about it. $5 million is nothing for a starting pitcher.
Dude, he's made 9 starts now. I've looked up on the White Sox. 9 starts, 50 innings, 52 hits, 4.29 ERA, which, he's never going to break a pane of glass. We've talked about that at length, but they just gave him away. I mean, just gave him away and said, we're going to go with Jimenez and we're going to give Gallardo all this money.
Well, it wasn't so much that Jimenez and Gallardo, I mean, those guys were already going to be in the rotation.
Sure.
They were saying Tyler Wilson and Mike Wright were better options, and I mean, it's amazing. And look, Gallardo has been hurt, so they have been down a guy from what they expected. But now he's not. He's back. So think about the progression here. Mike Wright sent down, was called back up after the O'Day injury. They end up giving Wright a mulligan. It worked out for one start, but then they're right back in the same position. Jimenez replaced by Yovani Gallardo, and then Mike Wright replaced by Jimenez. I mean, it's just, you're reshuffling deck chairs on the Titanic, and to not even throw someone else in the equation, I hate the message, and it speaks volumes about where they feel they are with their starting pitching, because, quite frankly, none of those guys in Norfolk's rotation right now you feel are good enough. Why are you even fielding a team at Norfolk then? I mean, if you don't feel they're worthy of replacing guys that have ERAs of 7 and 6.
That's the reason they're there. That's the reason you're giving them the ball, is to get them here.
And I'm not trying to be too flippant in saying that, but
you're allowed. You're allowed. And again, we're here bitching about a first-place team. I mean, I would have loved to have had that problem from 1998 to 2012.
But I'm complaining about it because we've said this over and over. They don't need to have great starting pitching. It just needs to be not horrendous. Just be mediocre. Mediocre, I would celebrate mediocrity for this Orioles rotation. And I complain about it because all the other aspects of this club are good enough to be postseason caliber. No doubt about it. We complain about the offense. Overall, this is a really good offense. It's not perfect, but it's certainly good enough. We talked about the defense. Is it as good as it was 2 years ago? No, but the infield defense is still excellent, and the overall defense still is good enough. It's just, the bullpen. Even without Darren O'Day, they've done a very respectable job over the last 2.5 weeks without him, but it's starting to add up, and you're really seeing that. And Tuesday was a perfect example. But Michael Givens was off his game. He pitched terribly. There's no sugarcoating that. But at the same time, who was Buck to turn to other than Oliver Drake, who they just called up and did a nice job? But at the same time, you're really counting on Givens to be able to pitch through it. But you didn't have Brad Brock available. There was no Darren O'Day. They were down Brian Dunsing and Dylan Bundy. It adds up. So it all comes back to starting pitching, and it's amazing to me that you're going back to Ubaldo Jimenez. And let's face it, I realize they've had the issues in the pen, but they knew when they optioned Mike Wright on Friday that they needed a starting pitcher on Wednesday, whether it was going to be someone internally that was already on the roster or someone that was at AAA or even AA Bowie. And they elected to go with Ubaldo Jimenez. It really, to me, sends a bad message all the way around.
A very spicy version of Luke Jones today here on the backside of a couple of losses. Luke will be back at the ballpark with Buck and Ubaldo and the boys on Wednesday evening. The Orioles taking on the Padres. The good news is the Padres are starting a guy with an ERA worse than Jimenez, right?
And know what? I would have been remiss not to mention that. Eric Johnson, who they acquired, they acquired from the White Sox in the Shields deal. Yeah.
There you go.
He has an ERA over 8, and Ubaldo Jimenez has the superior ERA of tonight's starting
Well,
pitcher.
dude, chicks dig the long ball, and, whatever you're paying for the ticket tonight, if you're paying to see runs scored, Luke, I hope you bring your pillow and your cot with you to the game tonight. This looks like a 4-hour special to me.
This is one of those games where you get comfortable, settle in, and go. Don't hesitate to have that extra cup of coffee as we get through this one.
There'll be more scoring than there'll be in the Chile-Colombia game, by the way. So,
although we'll say this, and lo and behold, this will be the night Ubaldo Jimenez, the good one.
2-hit shutout tonight. 8 innings, no doubt about it. Shut the door.
Reverse lock.
You can find Luke out on the internet anywhere sports is sold. He is Baltimore Luke on Twitter, as well as Luke at WNST.net. You can find me, Nasty, at WNST.net. As you know, I've been Facebook Living and YouTube streaming on our WNS TV channel, as well as being out on the internet as well, and celebrating 25 years in radio, putting together my WNST Rock Week for next month, which I'm really excited about, and I'll be editing that stuff the next 2 weekends as well. That begins on July 11th so far. John Bon Jovi, Billy Joel, the Black Crowes, Dennis DeYoung, Tommy Shaw. Boy, oh boy, lots and lots of good stuff. That's all I can. Lots of Rock and Roll Hall of Famers. That's the week of July 11th. You can find anything you miss out in the Buy a Toyota audio of all 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device. Just download the TuneIn Radio app, our morning newspaper. Hit your email inbox absolutely free every morning at 7 a.m. That is powered up by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. And last but never, ever least, breaking news happens first on the WNST text service. It is all brought to you by our friends at Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And, of course, Dennis will be here on Thursday driving you home, as well as the Orioles have a day off mañana, and the Rays come in this weekend for a bunch of games. We'll talk about that. All right. I'm Nestor. This is WNST.net, AM 1570, Taos in Baltimore, and WNST. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.